Good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of Anantha, where we are in conversation with Arjun Rajendran, wonderful poet, and he has written 3 collections of poetry. That is also a chapbook, and I'm very happy to have Arjun here because I find him an extremely interesting poet and a person, of course, but his poetry is something that grips you, that amazes you with the range of imagination and the ability of these lines to bring together seemingly very, very disparate, let's say, materials, which possibly shouldn't be coexisting in the same universe. So that kind of conjoining that he's able to do is beautiful, and I love him for the sake of his art as well as technique, and it is enviable because, you know, at one point you imagine that his poetry is very cosmopolitan because you know, of the kind of experiences that he narrates, the tastes that he brings in. He uses words such as photozincographed, Zinfandel, okay. And then, you know, just when you have settled into that impression of him, he comes at you with words like suicided and Tyrosadan. And suddenly you don't know where you are anymore. Okay. And in his beautiful universe, you know, people can deposit their sexually transmitted diseases into ATMs. You know, they can pull out entirely new narratives out of ATMs. And his imagination of the nation that we are is absolutely wonderful. It is cynical, but with the right amount of regret. And you know, I would say that Arjun's verses are not for the faint-hearted, or you know, for those people who want to look at the moon and quote these lines, or you know, do something wishy-washy like that. You know, his lines are not meant for those people. You know, because these are lines that demand attention, that demand respect. And Arjun is also the founder of the Quarantine Train, which is a wonderful group of poets, you know, who get together, discuss poems, have master classes, you know, basically talk about the ideas of writing and encourage people to write. And personally, I respect Arjun on account of the impeccable sense of integrity that he has as a human being, and the fact that he is not afraid to speak about things as, you know, they are. So you know, Arjun, I would like to tell you that, you know, I think that your poems refuse to sit still, because, you know, there are spaceships that are zooming around through ESP portals, cosmonauts, and of course a lot of French and German and science. You know, it all coexists sometimes within the same you know, lines, the same poems. So what I want to open our conversation with is, Arjun, I want to ask you, what do you see, you know, when you look around you? What do you see? And you know, one minute, you know, they are just grapes sitting in a bowl probably, and at what point does that transformation happen when you see them as predecessors to you know, the possibility of wine? So that's what I want to open with.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. I mean, thank you for such a close reading of my work. First of all, delighted to be here, and I mean, I don't think I've read my work so closely, or but really honored to be here. And thank you, everyone who's here. Okay, first of all, how do I see the world? It's nothing. I mean, it's just. I don't think there's anything special about the way I see the world around me or my observations. It's in retrospect, you know, when I sit in front of the paper and when you know, the blank page becomes a sort of laboratory. That's when the world takes on. You know, that's when I see that, when I go back to it in memory, that, you know, there's something here that's special. There's something here that's magical. There are, and I let it loose, because yes, like you said, there are disparate experiences that are not necessarily connected in time. And how do you connect them in time? So that's been there's been a sort of challenge for me always, to find that thread of thought going through, to find narratives, to connect disparate events, disparate people, because now in the present, when you look at it, you look outside the window, it's just a view outside, it's pleasant and all of those things. It's that moon shining in the sky and all of those cliches. But when you when you go back into yourself and really examine the finer details of it, I'm sure all of us have memories that we don't really. It's process of training yourself to bring those memories that are most fleeting and that you yourself don't know exist within you, and it surprises you constantly, and that's the greatest gift of poetry, I think, to be able to surprise the writer constantly and to reveal things about yourself that you didn't know, relationships with the world around you that you didn't know. So that's and my world is not just the physical world, right? I mean, it's also the literary world that informs me a lot. It's also, what I don't know, the world that's unseen, that intrigues me quite a bit. The world as it could be, that the possibilities of it, that intrigue me quite a bit. So it's not just the world as it is, which itself is a mystery, an enigma, because the world as it is it's quite complex and it's unfathomable for any single mind. So I think, I mean, you have to live in the present, past, and future together. It's a continuum, and then create some sort of reality. And my attempts to write poems are that, to surprise myself first. I mean, and to weave this narrative, to thread all this together, different.
So, how were your poems when you began writing in your early days? Because I see a very steady progression, a sort of, chapter by chapter progression in your works as they go on. So, something about that?
Yeah. I first, I really didn't, although my mother was a published poet and all of that, but I didn't really, I wasn't influenced by her work. I couldn't understand her work at the time at all. And I was more influenced by songwriting, by very popular bands. And I wanted to be a songwriter more than anything else. And I was writing lyrics. I was doing the usual rhyme, end rhyme things, all of that, writing very, very prolifically. And then I had a mentor, and I never acknowledged him in the book, but his name is William Bean. And his criticism was very useful. He told me that there are certain problems in your longer works. Short poems are all right, but your longer poems need work, and you're losing your narrative here or there. So, I took that up as a sort of challenge, and it took me about 1 year to write a poem, and it was called. It was a poem about a table tennis game, and I sort of connected that to the unpredictability of the ball, not following the rules of the game, and even when you're very skilled, and connecting it to creating a metaphor of life for it. And he praised me for that poem, and the praise did a lot of damage because I tried really hard then again, I completely stopped writing after that for quite a long time, because the praise was, in a way, it was, I mean, I was in the clouds for months on end, because this is somebody who's very, very thrifty with his praise, doesn't, and he wrote a beautiful, beautiful email, I still have today, saying that I'm very proud of you and very proud of the understanding you brought into poetry, and I was not wrong about you, and all of that, and it meant the world to me. But at the same time, it stopped me writing for quite a long time, because I was very scared that I was trying too hard after that. Then I did venture into I tried venturing into other genres. I tried writing novels many times, and was very, very unhappy with the attempt. And so there's a huge gap that's where I've not written poetry. So though I started in 2000, and I started in 1999. And I just had 2 publications till 2001, and then my next publication was a long time afterwards. So, yeah.
I see. And since you mentioned your mother, might I say that we are joined here by Arjun's mother, who is also a poet. So welcome, ma'am. And this table tennis, poem that you were talking about, is that the same as the ping pong ball in your book,
Yes,
Snake
the
Wine?
snake one, the last
I
poem.
see. So why is it the last poem there? Because I thought Snake Wine ought to be the last one, but then I was surprised by TT, ping pong. Sorry, yeah.
Because in a way, that poem was also destructive to me. It's when you do achieve something, and when you do achieve a sort of target, you don't have any other target. Then my only target at the time was to please William Bean to write a poem that would, my mentor would say is a good poem, and he gave me more than that. And and that's why I placed it at the end of the book, because going back to that, that kind of praise can sometimes, especially when you're starting off, uh, can sometimes be detrimental to.
I
Uh,
found, sorry, yeah, go on, please.
no, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I found Snake Wine to be quite experiential. It was seemed like a very personal narrative, a sort of a catharsis that you were expressing there.
Snake Wine is actually poems written over a lot of years, right from the beginning to, it was very 22, 19, and 26. So written over a period of years together. So it's different voices speaking. Yeah, yeah. So it's more confessional than my other books. Much more confessional. Much more. Um, yeah, definitely. But it also contains one of the poems which is very very important uh, for me. I think Snake Wine does start with fire. Correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
it starts with fire.
yeah, yeah. And that poem was a very important poem for me, because again. This was a poem, early draft I worked with William Bean, and I was not comfortable with the draft at all. It had been rejected. The early version had been rejected 6-7 times, uh, and I just gave it up. But the memory of it was so strong that one experience was I don't know, it was macabre. In a way, it was life changing. Seeing this body being burnt in a school playground, sunlight and darkness, and all of that. And I wanted to make something out of it. I knew there was a poem in it, and the initial version was very very. It was trying too hard. I sort of said that it was a Bharatanatyam dancer and smoke and all of that, and it was in 2012. That's about 10 years exactly when the final version just hit me. I wrote it in 15 minutes, and I got an acceptance in 3 days for it from. And surprising thing about poetry, sometimes this sits with you, and this poem sat with me for 10 years, and I never attempted. I had tried 6-7 versions, but I let it go, and for 5-6 years I didn't touch it at all. And then one evening I came back to it, and I said, let's try this again, and boom, it all came through, and there was not one single edit then. The structure just flowed through, and I put it in. Then it was something magical about it. You cannot really define this creative process, and there's something out of your control here, and you just have to give in sometimes to it, and that's a surprise, that was a turning point for me. After that, I had more confidence and faith in myself. So.
And I like the way you dealt with the disease as well in Snake Wine. The reference to the X-rays, and the impression that the X-rays leave on the minds. I mean, on the sheet, and how one can read it. The X-rays of grandma's lungs, from the corners of an afternoon, velvet rivers under the surface of dreams. This is a stretch mark of the universe growing healthy in Krishna's mouth, the anatomy of a doubt spreading through mountainous towns on railroads leading into the rings of Saturn. This is the invisible urn holding the ashes of a fiery Ouroboros. And the poem's titled Ha Ho Ho. Is that the sound of a cough, or is that something else?
No. There are two kinds of lava. It was this poem after a visit to Hawaii, Big Island, Hawaii,
Hmm.
And there are two kinds of lava. One is Pahoy Hoy, and the other one is, I mentioned that too in the book. I forget the other one's name. So the other one's probably a drier kind of lava, and this one's a flowing lava. So this is about lava. So the entire poem, the title, and yeah. So the invisible urn, all of that, all of those connections. Yeah.
I see. So please explain the transition into the second work that you have, Cosmonaut in Herge's Rocket. Yeah. Because I've been very fascinated with your interest in popular culture, particularly with comics. In fact, some of my choice of graphic novels have been informed by you. And while most of the world, I think, likes Asterix on account of, the relative simplicity of its narration, the straightforward, let's say, connections that people can make, the linguistic humor, Tintin, on the other hand, requires a certain connoisseur's eye to run over it, a certain appreciation of an alternative universe,
Hmm.
where everything need not be humorous, or everything humorous has an element of sadness to it. So,
Yes, yes. And in fact, I read most of my Tintin in Kerala.
uh-huh.
Uh, yeah, in Cochin. And I would actually, I remember one afternoon I was sitting in my mother's, she'd taken me to her office, and she was in a meeting, and everybody was like, yeah, cute kid and all of that. And then I was busy, taking money from a purse and going to the nearby shop. And I think I purchased almost all the Tintins, about 15 volumes on the same day, and,
Oh,
and she just
how
laughed
much
about
money did she have in her purse?
it. She had a lot. And even at the time, it was expensive. Yeah, it wasn't not nearly as expensive as today, but it still was, yeah, quite expensive. And yeah, so I'd make these trips, round trips, and keep reading it, finishing it, and go back. And so I had to connect all of this. The thing is, I used Tintin as a trope to explore personal memories. Again, it's a conduit. So it's not really about Tintin, but it's Tintin is all these characters in Tintin, Snowy, Tintin, Rastapopulus. All of these are tropes to explore deeper memories. Like the epilogue of Flight 714, for instance. That poem is about my father's childhood.
Hmm.
It's about yeah. I've heard about the Tunguska explosion when I was very young, and that explosion. These sorts of things fascinate me. These world events. Nobody knows really. That still is a bit of a mystery. If it was an asteroid, there's conspiracy theories about a flying saucer having crashed there, and acres and acres of trees were deforested, and so all of this, I thought, that explosion really happened in Coimbatore. What would happen? And then I connected it to my father's childhood, and all of that, and brought in pop icons like Nirma, the Nirma girl, and people falling in love with the Nirma girl, and her brain. So it's just that your mind takes on really crazy thoughts sometimes, and takes you in directions, and you need to, I mean, how do you know which thoughts to accommodate and which thoughts to leave out? So I think that's why drafts help, and you can always change it later. But as long as you're happy with the final version and you don't worry too much about comprehensibility and all those things and what people will think of it and how they're going to make of it, as long as the connections are clear to you in your head, as long as there's an inner rhyme pattern that's working, the sound of the poem that's guiding you, that guides me a lot. So the inner rhyme patterns, yeah. So I'm fairly comfortable with that. So Tintin is actually a trope. Again, the title poem, the cosmonaut in Arjun's rocket, this is a Tintin poem. It's part of the Tintin series, right? And Rakesh Sharma for me is a fascinating figure because reclusive man. Hardly anybody knows about him today. Probably in our generation, or 30 years ago, he was famous as the first astronaut, then cosmonaut actually. It's Russian, and I have a fascination with the USSR again because the exhibitions my father took me to. I have a collection of Soviet books. I keep and those illustrations, all of that, is so powerful. And it's like, how do you do if something so powerful is there in you? It's also a memory of childhood, right? It's not just the games you played with your friends and all of that. It's also the world that's been created by this sort of a literature from a foreign country in which we had very close ties with. A pre-perestroika time, pre-glasnost time, where there's such close ties with India, and this nation is existing in your head. And how do you bring this nation onto the page and connect it to your personal memories? So.
Yeah, that strong Soviet connect was there for, in Malayalam also, with children's literature. We had a series of books like Chekkum Gekkum, then Achanda Balyam. I think Rash would know more about that. I've read a couple of them, managed to actually. So, yeah, and, it's a very 90s kind of an atmosphere that sometimes, creeps into your homes when you mention all of these kind of cultural
80s,
references.
right.
80s. Yeah, 80s. Yeah, 80s. It's a very 80s thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, because it's there. It kind of takes you back to all those ads and the time when Gold Spot was it, and that kind of a thing. And somewhere probably there is a sense of nostalgia also. And I love that poem where I think you go into a comic book shop. It's called Gang Talk.
Gang Talk. Yeah, that is a real experience. Yeah.
It seemed that way. So tell me, Arjun, how much of you is there in your works?
It's a lot of it depends on the poem actually. Like poems like Gang Talk, poems like Mangoes. It's all about me, and I mean, those are very confessional poems. Yes. Hotel Lobby, Sultan Ahmed, Istanbul, absolutely confessional. That is me there. But then the Tintin poems it's not me at all. It's my father over there. There's other poems like Album, which are also about my father. A bit of me is there in it, but it's a lot about stories I've been told. I've heard from my uncle, the ghost stories, all of those things are there. And also I'm fascinated by physics, theoretical physics, and a lot of that is there in Cosmonaut as well. And while I was writing a series of Tintin poems, I also wanted to write a series of poems based on the physicist Richard Feynman, because he has these very fascinating diagrams on them. But unfortunately, I couldn't do much with the diagrams. But I used him also as a trope again. I had Feynman in conversation with Ramanujan, and both of them didn't. They lived in different times, not contemporaries. But I just thought of this Tamilian, having this conversation with Feynman, and both of them. Okay, Feynman lived a relatively longer life than Ramanujan. He passed away from cancer. Ramanujan passed away from probably fever, pneumonia, or something at a very early age. Right, it was a very early death. So yeah, so having them in conversation, and then see, the narrative is very different from the others.
So the hotel lobby poem that you were talking about, Istanbul. Yeah. Yeah. So could you just elaborate on that experience?
On Istanbul experience?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was staying in this place called Sultan Ahmed, which is a very touristy area of Istanbul. And this was around November, and very cold time. Very cold. There was no snow, but it was freezing rain almost. And yeah, I mean, lovely place with all these gorgeous monuments. The Hagia Sophia, all of that. But on our first date, the experience was remarkably similar. Traveling from the Ataturk airport to our hotel, the taxi driver took us for a ride and just eat us. Something that was very familiar to anybody, in India, right? So, and we just come from Prague, where the experience was so different. And then, my co-travelers were complaining. They were like, what kind of a crazy place is this? We should have as well gone to India. And I was like, okay, just wait. So anyway, all this tourism later, it was really tired roaming all day, with heavy backpacks and cameras, and then coming back to the hotel. And then our room was not done because they gave us we changed the room because the room wasn't. I mean, we didn't like the room, so we just changed it. And so they said that because you changed it, we have to still do the housekeeping for the room. So they said, why don't you just wait here? And then they gave us. Istanbul is very famous for its teas, right? Rose tea and all of that. So and we just started talking to this Iraqi family, from originally from Baghdad, but settled in Germany, and we were at the time living in America, so for a very long time. So just the connection of immigrants together, and how you meet in a foreign country as tourists, and but still there's this universal feelings of estrangement, of of being alienated, of how that homeland is never yours. It's just an adopted homeland. All of that, I thought there was enormous potential for that. That's exactly what was happening over there. And yeah, that poem came out quite naturally. So
Right. Actually, I wanted to ask you this. Have you had any formal structured education in English?
no, no.
That's it. See, I have been asking people that, and I found that some of the best poets are those who have no background in English literature.
Okay.
Like yesterday, I was talking to Priya Sarukai, and she mentioned the same thing. I'm kind of building a case against structured education in English. Now, you're the editor of the Bombay Literary Magazine, and it's in that context that I'm asking you. Your experiences as an editor, and how does your personal process inform your editorial process? That's one thing. The next thing I want to know is what kind of poetry is being written today. I mean, there are all sorts, I know, but still, in the broader sense of the term, what is the kind of poetry that people are writing, and how do you decide as an editor that I would like people to look at this particular piece, or this is the kind of poems that I want people to come face to face with?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a tough one to answer. Uh, I can tell you very easily, Sonia, that I know what a bad poem is. It takes me 2 lines to tell me that I'm not going to use this poem. It'll take less than a minute for me to read a poem and decide, no, this is not a good fit. But it takes me much longer to decide if it's a good poem, if it's worthy of being published. So I sit on submissions, I come back to them, I revisit them, I see if it leaves the first impression that it created on me, does it last? Is it enduring? The innovation I find in language, for instance, the vulnerability that the poet brings into it, the honesty, the sincerity the poet brings into it. So is the experimentation a gimmick, or is it really something innovative? For instance, it's a very gimmicky thing to you take a word, put its letters into separate lines and change the structure just for the sake of changing structure. For me, that does nothing unless that really you're doing it for a reason. The structure has to speak to the form, the content. Unless that communication is there, for me, that experimentation structure does not work. I find it gimmicky. So that sincerity has to be there. Is it truly experimental in a sense? What is it? Is it groundbreaking in some levels? And I particularly have a penchant for multilingual, the use of interlinguistics. I love it when people incorporate Malayalam, Tamil, talk about Sony's work. Learning Malayalam is one of my favorite poems, which I published in TBLM, where each letter is itself a poem, where he talks about the shape of the letter as a poem in itself. So that is interlinguistics at its best, what he's doing with it. Whether it's domesticity, personal relationship, the way Zainab talks about her mother, in her poems and all of that. There's something startling about it. There is nothing. First of all, I look for cliches and see, because cliches can be edited out. If there's one cliche in a poem, that's fine. Couple of cliches, that's fine. As long as there's something more original to it, we can always edit out cliches with the help of the writer. But the larger problem is the tone, right? Deciding if the tone is working for you. And a lot of times, Sonia, the problem is that poets take on grand subjects. They take on stuff that like war. They take on stuff like Kashmir. They take on stuff like violence and fascism and all of that. But all they do with it is sloganeering. All they do with it is shout about it and repeat cliches and repeat what's in the news. So what's different? So I always, in my workshop at least, I always tell people, why does this have to be a poem? How is it different from a newspaper article or an essay or a non-fiction piece? Why would you call this a poem? What is it that makes it a poem? Is it worth being called a poem? In a poem, I don't see any room for wastage. Not one punctuation, not one word being wasted. And it's a very, very demanding genre. That's why. And yeah.
Yeah, please go on.
So the decision is but I do know when I like stuff, but it's just that I sit on it a little longer, see how it works for me in the longer run, and before making a decision to publish. But it's very easy for me to tell what's a bad poem, but what's a good poem or what's a very good great poem, it's a little more challenging. I mean, there is no universal way to judge that. I mean, it's always something innovative. You talk about your experiences, you talk about anything. You can talk about anything, really. You can talk about drinking a cup of coffee, but it's the approach to it. It's how you arrive at it. It's how you're putting those experiences down the page and making it your own. That matters. So tell me something that's unique about this. What's the originality you're bringing to it? How is this poem? How does it have a right to exist in the world? Amongst all these poems, how is it shining out? Where is the you in it? Where is your voice in it? And if I don't hear that voice, poem does not work for me.
So on the note of the voice, your first poem was your first set was all about experiential kind of writing. The second fused a number of different elements. It was very strong on technique, and then we come to your third collection, One Man Two Executions, which is exceptional in terms of its sound, its technique, its persona. So will you just elaborate on how you came about this book?
My dad in probably in 2016 or 15, he told me about. My dad is a history buff. He's an amateur numismatist. So he had come across these diaries, and he told me that, do you know that all these diaries exist that talk about Pondicherry 300 years ago, and it's like, really, that's very interesting. Really, yes, this person has sort of this actual day-to-day accounts of Pondicherry. Maybe you should do something with this. Yeah, okay, fine. I just filed it to the back of my head. I said, okay, let me see what I can do with it. And then because I was working on my second book and I was obsessed with Soviet culture and all of that and putting it together. And then in 2017, after my book project was over, my chapbook was over, then I went back. I actually took a look at the diaries and was just stunned by what I found over there. The sort of data this man, Anantha is written into, the level of detail he's gone into. And he starts off with ships arriving into the Pondicherry harbor from all these different places and going to these different places, Bencoolen, Mascarene Islands, and the goods they're carrying, the import duties, the sort of bribes which are almost ceremonial, they're accepted. You're meant to give a bribe to the governor. It's almost expected. And so many different customs, and as you read more and more into those novels, there's a lot of data. A lot of data. Like so many bales of silk were there. There were this much of gunpowder was brought in. This much of this was brought in. Pearls were brought in. Coral was brought in. Jute was brought in. All these things. So you're reading through inventory lists, and then all of a sudden he jumps and he says, something strange happened yesterday. A man was executed publicly for desertion. And then I'm like, oh, okay, there we have it. There is something that speaks to me in the diary, and I note it down immediately. And then I keep taking those notes. So once I'm done with volume 1, I go back to that, to my notes, And I'm like, how do I approach this now? What do I make of this? Now I have just one line over here. And a person was executed. What do I do with it? How do I make a poem out of it? Then I'm like, okay, the only way I can do this is, to see it as if from the viewpoint of a ship that's approaching the Pondicherry harbor. And I think the Saint-Geran was the one that was approaching the Pondicherry harbor. But actually, in the diary, Saint-Geran comes to the harbor on a different day, and the execution happens on a different day. But in the poem, I have conflated the two events. And I thought that would be interesting, to see it from that perspective. That would give it a reality to the execution, and how the sailors are looking at it, how that the mobility of that is seeping into the ship through the waters, from land to water, and that's the connection. So again, very, very interesting. He mentions a lot of cosmological events like Chezeau's comet, which was called the Great Comet, and it has been documented in several other books also. So how would this comet actually look if there was a parade going to the governor's office, and on top of that there's a celestial event? How are people going to interpret that? How is Pondicherry seen under that? Ancient Pondicherry through the eyes of these people who don't have much science or anything, and how miraculous is that? And to recreate that event and put that history on paper, that's what my attempts were. So some of my attempts in the Pondicherry poems, and then so I focus on characters who are footnotes, who are nowhere in history. Duplay is in history. Anantha Pillai is also in history. But there are so many who are not in history, like the Begum who was burned. It's not in history. Like Savary, the dog catcher. He's not in history. Who are these people? There's so much of caste in his every page is almost riddled with caste. And of course, Anantha Pillai was a caste believer. He was a caste Hindu. And at the time, almost everybody was. It was a very, very caste-ridden society. And even the Christians had different views. They had views for left-hand caste, for the caste Christians. So even if you converted, there were caste Christians and there were casteless Christians. Mm. So, and they had to be in a separate view and worship differently. And then you have these passages where there's English, this white man insults. There's this Christian Indian lady for wearing some revealing robes or clothes, and almost in words calls her a dancing woman, which in today's language would be a slut. If you could probably insult her that way, say like you're wearing perfume and all these ornaments and coming to God's house. So when you're reading all of this, through the diaries, that these need to be written down. It needs to be taken out from the text, the fact, and turned into something more imaginative, and it needs to be resurrected, brought back to life in the century.
Right, because there is desecration as well, which I found to be very telling. Would you like to either read Chezeau's Comet or Desecration for us, please? Do you mind?
I'll read Desecration. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I guess the Pondicherry that you mentioned is not very different from the rest of the landmass that we occupy at this point.
The rest of the
landmass that we occupy, the country that we call ours.
Likely. Okay, Desecration, 1747. No priest in the Eastern temple will clean the filth hurled from St. Paul's Church. Luminous, the governess dines on China and desecration. They arrive, children and their children, to scoop shards, stool, eyes never meeting the worshippers who, unable to decide the worser of the two sins, curse the evening's evil astrological stars.
maybe some context on this, please?
Yeah. So there is one journalist actually asked me about this. She asked because this poem is. She asked me, if I want to publish this in the newspaper. I mean, this talks about community violence. So is there any source? Can you prove it? Or did you make it up? I said no. It's on this. This is this page. There's 6 or 7 references in Eli's diaries to this. All over. Like the governor's Duplessis wife was a proselytizer. She was she wanted to convert everybody. She believed that Hindus are whatever they believed in was barbaric, that the temple was a barbaric institution back in, and she wanted to demolish it. She tried everything possible to try to demolish it, and they eventually do demolish it later. There's the poem called Destruction that comes later, where they actually do demolish the temple. And so in this case, there's filth. The church and the temple are in very close proximity to each other, and filth is thrown, excreta is thrown into the temple's compound. But that's what Anantha Pillai tells us. What is not said is who's going to clean that filth that is in the temple. Is it going to be the priests? Because of course it's against their caste. It's their, they're Brahmins. They're not supposed to touch it. So who are the people who are going to actually clean that shit? So it's about them. It's actually children. Children were put to work, a lot of children, and probably children at that time were having children at a very early age. So that's the desecration. So the desecration is a double desecration in the eyes of the Brahmins. One is the filth being thrown into the temple. That's one desecration. The second desecration is people are not supposed to be in the temple, have to be inside the temple to clean the filth.
And this question of caste seems to occupy a lot of your, I think, concern in this particular book, isn't it? The cancelling, I think the cancel mark is looking like one of the most potent weapons you have in your repertoire as far as this book is concerned.
The strike through.
Yeah, the strike through. Yeah, why is that?
I don't know. It just felt very natural in this book too. It's a sort of erasure, correct? Because the entire history itself is sort of erasure, isn't it? I mean, some parts of history are erasure. What is left out is erasure. So these like for instance, I've used it in the case of quadruplets as a very literal form of erasure, because the quadruplets die. So that's the dial symbol represents. It looks like a fetus if you look at it, and I'm just striking it through because the quadruplets eventually they don't make it. So at the time for it was probably a very, very singular event in Pondicherry. I'm not sure if quadruplets were ever born again in Pondicherry. I've not found any recorded accounts of it. Maybe, and at that time, obviously there was no medical care. Hygiene was so low, and I've used it again in different places. Yes, as you can see.
There's something, Arjun, that I noticed as I kept reading your works, is your visualization of the reader. You're not trying to make this easy for the reader at all. In fact, sometimes I even suspect whether you anticipate the reader while you're writing. Do you do that? Because this is very cerebral poetry that assumes that, there's a certain intelligence that you accord your reader with.
Yeah. It's in a way, some sort of a gauntlet that I'm throwing down. It's my how do I put it? My priority is to the history, is to the telling of the story, to the people who don't have that voice, who not had that voice. And my poem's focus was on, in One Man to Execution, was to bring those voices alive at the cost of the reader's comprehension. I mean, the most readers' comprehension or the average reader's comprehension, perhaps. But I also know that there are readers who will catch it. There are intelligent readers. You caught it. That, I mean, even if a few readers catch it, even that's enough for me. That's satisfying enough for me. I'm not looking for a mass popular, poem that's vastly popular. Or that was not my intention at all. So I didn't, at the cost of, I didn't want to dilute the authenticity of the historical voice, because it's everything in writing. I mean, when you approach a historical work, it's in recreating that period. It's in the language, right? How you approach. It's again the how. If you're using modern idioms, if you're using today's English, if you're using your language, if you're using that to express history, which is written by Anantha Pillai, it's incongruent. It's simply I mean, it's inevitable for some sort of modernity to creep in. That's inevitable. But as far as possible, can you vacuum it? Can you seal the poem from it? Can you not avoid? Can you avoid these tonal anachronisms? In your work, and in to do that, you'll have to write in the language which was probably used at that time, or use references to recreate that ambience, that atmosphere. And yes, there are plenty of references over here, and I didn't want to insert footnotes because it just I don't know. It simply wasn't sounding right to me. Some people suggested it. Maybe you should have footnotes here. Maybe you should have footnotes there. I said, no. I think everything is there, because if you actually do read the poems closely, you will get it. Except for some words, you might have to research or something. But the overall tone, like Marie Gertrude, for instance, a lot of people don't. Some people don't get it. Some people do get it very easily. They ask me, who's Marie Gertrude? And some people say that, yeah, it's a ship you're talking about, right? Yes, of course, it's a ship I'm talking about. It's very evident in the poem. Even the structure resembles the bow and the and the stern of a poem. So it's just need to read it. And if you think it's not worth reading again, that's fine. I mean, then if you don't want to understand it fully, and if you want to come away with limited understanding, or whatever understanding you take out of it, that's also fine. That's your way of reading it. So I cannot tell people how to read, but they can't tell me how to write either. So, yeah.
Yeah, and those punctuations, the cedille, the accents.
Mm-hmm.
So I found this to be a marvelously technically as well artistically sound book, and which makes me curious to know what next.
Well, Sonia, okay. There are 6 more diaries of Anantha Pillai that are left unread. I might go back to them. I'm not very sure, because it's taken a huge toll on me, this research, and because I didn't have as much fun writing these poems as I had with the Cosmonaut. The Cosmonaut was just going on a wild rampage, enjoying myself thoroughly. With this book, it was much more I don't know how to put it. It was much more rigorous in a way, and each poem took a month approximately to write. And I had to sit on it, and sometimes the poem just wouldn't come, and it was very frustrating. To go back to these notes, study these notes, take these notes, read them again, and then to find out that there is no poem in it, that I cannot bring a poem to it, and immensely satisfying when you do find a poem too. So, but it was a process that was very new to me, and I don't know if I'm going to continue. Even if I go back to the diaries, I don't know if I'm going to follow it. I mean, use the same registers of expression. I might follow a different methodology. I don't know, but right now, yeah, that's the only thing which I might probably do. I don't have anything else in mind. I have been writing some confessional poems and some other poems, but I don't think I put them in a collection or anything. So I've been writing those just for my own, just for the sake of writing, just to keep myself busy after that. But yeah.
Is it the staying in that is doing this?
No. I was for the most part. I rarely go out as it is. I'm not a very outdoorsy person. Even when I was in Scotland, I was wintered in most of the time. in my room. So it's not the isolation ground. In fact, isolation is helping me more. It's actually, well, most people would find it difficult or miss interaction. I don't. I actually love being in my house by myself and doing my things, reading, and this is actually very it's a very germane environment for research, you know. But I've not gotten into it yet.
So, oh, we are almost there. So, is there anybody who would like to ask Arjun any questions? Anything that you would like to inquire of him? Please do so now. And while people get their thoughts in order, Arjun, will you read something for us? Maybe fire or anything that you pick. That's fine.
Okay, I'll read the Istanbul. Yeah,
sure.
Hotel lobby, Sultan Ahmed, Istanbul. After the mosque and the church, some chestnuts, after the rain, every drop a passport to misery, we return to a room not hosted. As we wait, we're offered Turkish tea and apple tea. The family next to us is, we learn, from Germany. Well, they're Iraqis from Germany, we're Indians from America. But this evening, we're all in the lobby of a hotel in Sultan Ahmed, united against the weather, armed with tea, conversing about our adopted lands, quetching about the cost of food in this tourist district, how to bargain for lambs, the cheat who drove us from Taksim, why they will never return to Baghdad. Sharing snippets from our lives to keep the windy evening outside our thoughts, from gripping our bones with visited sorrows, till we only remember places we are here to forget.
Yes, it does bring back those ideas or our ideas of those places. And Arjun, I was just wondering, do you think you have found your voice?
Sonia, I like to constantly, I don't like to box myself as into any particular category. This has been one of my biggest preoccupations. So I don't want to be recognized as this is classic Arjun Rajendran, or this is this poem, or this is this genre. No, that's why I keep shifting my genres and keep pushing myself to break those frontiers and to go in directions I've not been before. So I think I'm always improving my voice. I think I have found my voice in certain poems, but I'm always adding to my voice. So it's a constantly evolving voice, I think. Yeah.
We have a question from Sarah Sethia. Please go ahead.
So my question is, I read one of his poems and I think it was titled How to Interview a Beetroot. And I loved the poem, but I just want to know from him why he chose a beetroot and not some other vegetable. Why a beetroot? That's my first question. I also have one more question, but after he answers this.
Hi, Sarah. Good to have you here. Well, it's called Interviewing a Beetroot. And this was actually one of those poems where you don't think at all, where a title just pops to your head, an image just pops into your head. And I've been trying to write, I was trying to write before that a sarcastic corporate poem for the longest time, giving a middle finger to the corporate world. But in this case, it just happened in one shot. It's just the one, one of those poems that the imagery just comes through and the lines are just, there's something that's guiding you, you don't know what. This is when I believe, I don't like to use the word spiritual, but that's probably the only word that I can use. So it's my closest experience to something that's spiritual. Where you don't know where it's come from, but you start writing about it, you put it into a title, and boom, the whole poem is in front of you, and before you know it, it's ended. And you're guided by that inner voice, that inner rhythm, whatever you've written, all of that is there, but you're not really working on it. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I have one more question. Can I go ahead and ask?
Yeah, sure.
So in I don't like, it was maybe an interview or an article that I read about you where you mentioned that you abuse profusely in daily life, but you're very skeptical of, like, when people, you're very skeptical when people use slang words in poetry, and that you're very particular about how it's used and why it's used. Could you please tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, yeah. So yes, I do abuse quite a lot in personal life. I use the F-bomb very profusely. But I think in a poem, again, like I said, a poem is a very, it's challenging genre. It's and every word you put in there needs to be weighed carefully. So are you abusing for the sake of creating some sort of shock value to say that you're cool, you're modernist, you're contemporary or trendy to make somebody laugh, or are you really doing it out of some sort of anger? And I've actually had a workshop where I discuss using the how to use the F word in poems effectively. And I think the best way one uses the F word, or is when you talk about it literally, not talk about it as a metaphor. Yeah. So any sort of I'm not opposed to slang or abuse, but then again I feel that it's most times it's I have a vocabulary of it's not just profanity that I'm opposed to. It's also words like soul, moon, harmony. What's that? What are those sparkling things on dresses? Sequence. You read that almost
Yes.
every poem. Yeah. Yeah. So in almost every poem I've read that. Single most. I mean, I can pick out these words. It's again. I've seen these words being used brilliantly in very innovative ways. For instance, Ranjit Hoskote has a poem called Moonfire. And the poem, instead of the title, though it has the word moon in it, it's brilliant. So that's innovation, the use of the moon. So how are we going to use these used tropes, these cliches, and transform them? So slang otherwise is just slang. It's just cliches. It's occupying space and trying to create shock value. You use it in your personal life, and you will do it out of frustration. That's different. That's not, you're not creating. You're not trying to. But I think at least I bring. I mean, when I write my poems, I'm very cautious about that myself. So yeah, and also it doesn't. I need the, if I read it in other people's works, it needs to be convincing enough. So it doesn't convince me easily. So so I feel many times it's an easy way. It's an easy way out to express your inner angst. I feel it's a shortcut that people use. So that's the reason I'm a little opposed to it. Not because of any moralistic reason. So.
Well,
Thank
we have a
you.
question from, sorry, Sarah, anything else?
No, I just said thank you.
Okay.
Welcome.
So, yeah, Shalini Pattabhiraman would like to know, how do you engage with it to remove the cliche, both in your work and universally?
Universally, it's not my job to remove cliches. Okay, it's not possible to remove cliches too. I'd be it's not my preoccupation. I mean, as the work that comes to me as an editor, if it's that cliche, I won't even accept it. If there is some cliches which I think a poet could have, if it's possible to transform the poem, I certainly will try to work with the poet. But if they're adamant about it, I'll just let go and just say, okay, sorry, I'm not going to use this. In my work, that's really more difficult, right? Because you don't have a third eye watching over you. So often I used to have a lot of feedback from close friends, close poets, and they used to tell me, give feedback, and that feedback helped me a lot immensely. And I need to, I owe it to a lot of poets who have helped me with feedback. But now I think I'm fairly convinced that because of the tropes I approach and I and also as you read more, you understand what's a cliche and how to avoid it better. So that's what I mean by your revolution in your poetry journals. You read more and more, and then you understand more about your own cliches and how to work around them.
Interesting. There was Mahua Sen who wanted to know whether you would read the poem Refilling.
Refilling, yeah, sure. I find it online.
So we'll give that a minute. If anybody else would like to ask anything?
Okay, Sonia, I'm ready to read. I mean, if there are no questions, I can.
Oh, I thought you were going to read it. Yeah, please.
Okay. Refilling. How now to describe with anguish when my father got off the train platforms to refill a water bottle? Because nobody then had yet learned to sell water. When everyone started buying it, I was older, unlike the time my feet didn't reach the compartment floor. I sat by the window thinking the whistle will sound any second now. He'll never make it. Till he'd materialize beside coolies or a ticket collector and grin at me after stubbing his cigarette. Now that I travel alone everywhere, the loss of that uncertainty is just another adult fact. But I always carry a bottle inside me. I keep refilling it with memories from taps I often forget to close.
And that is that. I mean, you know, I also remember these times when people would get down and there would be these Milton water bottles, and
Right.
they would go and, you know, it looked like those things that you carry on camping trips or something, with those canvas pouches, and they would fill those and come. And Kumar Sanal would like to know what your opinion on experimenting with new forms and structure is.
Again, see, okay. Abbas, my friend, my dear friend, he put it very simply once. He said, you need to know the rules to break the rules. Okay, and I quite agree with that. You first need to write fairly conventional poems to be able to know how to break those conventions. And again, if the structure does not speak to the form, if there's, you know, it's disparate, if it's alienated from the form, it doesn't work for me. I think it's gimmicky. So just, and the easiest way people think to be experimental is to do it with structure, to change an enjambment or that way. I think that is the lowest form of experimentation to me. To me, the greater experimentation is in the content itself. Just writing in the couplet form, but connecting disparate elements, using metaphors originally, approaching subjects differently. That itself is experimental through form and not through structure. So I personally, that sort of experimentation works much better for me. Like you see a lot of Ranjini Murali's poems. You know, I mean, she of course has visual poems which are very experimental visually and content-wise, but she also has fairly, you know, she's a master of the form of meter. You know, you ask her to write in any meter, she'd be able to do it. And lots of her poems are metrical and they're so experimental, just in content. You know, so that's what I'm talking about. I mean, yeah. So,
I mean, there's been quite some experimenting with form in one man, two executions, right? Not just these strike throughs, but also in terms of spacing, alignment, the slant, and the squiggle punctuations.
I had to actually finish my French C2, I mean C1 levels, and a comfortable fluency in French to be able to finish one man two executions, because I was reading text in French.
Now I'm given to understand you're also doing German.
Yeah, but just basically hardly anything worth talking about. Yeah, yeah. But French was, yeah. My connection with French has been, and Alliance Française is very old. So I decided finally to join Alliance Française to finish this book. And then, of course, I continued with French because I love it's just another language and it helps me read more. But I primarily joined Alliance Française for finishing one man two executions because I wanted to get into the authentic French text of it, and that's why these accents, the French accents, are there, and the usage of French is in the collection.
You know, these fair, or let's say fair ground, and the let's say the horses and the carousels that keep making these, comebacks in your poems. What is the idea behind that?
That is, oh, you mean that? That.
Yeah.
There was another series which is a very macabre series which I tried to write. Okay, about an amusement park for dead people.
Hmm.
To take your dead people to the amusement park and have corpses do those rides all the time. So it's a very bizarre experiment, and I think I wrote about 4 or 5 of them, and only, I could use only 3 of those which I put in. So yeah, and again the carousel, like, it connects with that the person and the ghosts in the carousel are very real in my life. People I have insulted when I was a child. An orphan girl was working for us, whom I called an orphan. And it was such a terrible thing to say, just no excuse that I was a kid. And what do you do with it? How do you deal with that sort of guilt? And of course, my father's friend's daughter who had passed away, I didn't know her at all. So, and I go to their house just before I'm going for my visa interview at the US Embassy. It's about 20 years ago. And they're just, the sadness is so palpable and that really.
I suppose I want to ask a question. No speaking.
Yeah, sorry, please go on.
No, that's yeah, I mean, it had been so many, probably decades since their daughter passed away when she was 12 or 13, but the grief was so tangible in the air. You could just, pass a finger to the air and you could touch that sadness. It was, she was all over the walls, stitches and everything. And I had to sleep in a room, and when a portrait was there, and although I'm an atheist and all that, I do have a fear of the supernatural. So that was a very troubling night for me, sleeping there in their house. So all of these things came into that poem in the form of a carousel, meeting all my ghosts in the carousel. So
and that's very good. Let's say the way they keep turning and coming back, passing you by.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a prop. That's the thing. So these are props for the content. So that's the actual structure is the carousel. So yeah.
Again, I thought that was a very 80s, 90s, kid thing because there was a series of these, amusement park clown, kind of scary figures at that point of time.
Yeah, maybe.
Which has now come back as it, but we had it at that time.
Yeah, I know. Very, very, very scary. These clowns were. I spent a lot of sleepless nights, watching some utterly horrid movies. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was always there, an abandoned amusement park and these things going, creaking in the wind, kind of a thing. So when I read those, I was reminded of that. The kind of places and countries that you have been to or lived in, I think you have carried bits and pieces of them back home, and you have been kind of playing them out one after the other. Because I find it very sometimes James Dean kind of an attitude, but sometimes I find those Midwestern, Rust Belt kind of creeping in. So, what has been your engagement with the US?
Oh wow. Okay. Very traumatic for the most part. Very isolated. And I was in between jobs almost all the time. And being in the US without a job is, it's I think it's worse than in India. India, at least I have my parents are extremely supportive, but that support system was not there for me in the US. I didn't have too many friends or the friends you have in college are different. And I've traveled a lot in the US, yeah. Kept moving places, and you have to do lots of things to keep a job, lots of unethical things, supposedly unethical things, lying on your resume, all of that I've done, tried to fraudulent activities, post, and it was all over it was very common in the industry, but still that doesn't, yeah. So the thing is, you had to go and do it to survive. You had to go and lie through your teeth to survive. You had to go and lie through your teeth in these interviews, and that's what interviewing a beetle came out of that. My distaste for that. Like somebody asking you, so what are your flaws and weaknesses, and you say I'm a perfectionist, and you're bullshitting the guy, and the guy is bullshitting you. We know that that's the truth. But if you say that, no, I'm a drunk, are they going to hire you? No, they're not going to hire you. So there's this whole charade, of this, wearing these clothes. I don't even know what's the use of a fucking tie in the modern culture. Why do you need to tie? How does it help? And my entire distaste for that, working in these sort of environments, and sort of conversations with these other Indians, so obsessed. The only thing they're obsessed with is this green card, and there's no, literary connection, nothing you can talk about in common. It's always this green card dream, the American dream, and so many years of this, it's toxic. It wears you down. But again, the best part about the US libraries, I discovered great authors and read. I think my foundation, although I don't have you asked me if I have a background in English literature. I think my background in English literature came from these libraries, or literature. I won't say English literature, world literature. I owe it solely to these American libraries, which are fantastic, which is a great institution in itself. And that sort of compensated for a lot of things.
Yeah, I noticed that because of the choice of books that you have. I mean, it was under your advice I went and bought Christoph, the clockmaker book, Cox.
Yeah. Cox. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and a number of others. So now some of my friends go by your book choices that you post in Facebook. And yeah, seriously. So I guess that kind of range that you have does contribute. Because I see a great deal of let's say Polish, Czech, German writers, and I would like to end with that. The kind of influences that you have internalized.
Yes, certainly. Again, I owe this to William Bean, who would tell me, he would tell me, I would go to programs, half finish my degree, move on to another program. I would take a psychology class, take some courses in it, move on to a math class, take some courses in it, move on to a philosophy class, take courses in it, history class, literature class, like that. So, don't close your mind, Arjun, keep it open always, keep it open to the cosmos. Carl Sagan is a great educator, listen to him, listen to people like that, and be aware of posers like Ayakoka, who write best-selling books about. So he would, a lot of his, the eclectic approach came because of what he taught me early on. He said, you should go to the US, you should come stay with me, and you should do a course in philosophy or psychology, not literature. And I still, people ask me, what do I do? How do I become a better poet? I say, just read extensively, and not just read, watch movies, do anything you can to, that you enjoy, which is creative, look at photographs, read all sorts of books, read fiction, read non-fiction, read, philosophy tracks, read economics, don't be close, read mathematics, and physics, and so many other things. Yeah, watch movies, all the movies you can, and yeah, and comic books, of course, for me. But
are you a self-taught photographer as well?
Yeah, but I'm not a photographer. I'm a self-taught dabbler in photography. I'm not a photographer. Yeah, I had a lot of passion for photography. I even was crazy about it at one point of time, and I wanted to get into film photography and all of that. But unfortunately, yeah, I was too lazy to carry out that passion. Yeah.
Because I see these photography like features in your poems as well. In terms of the minuteness of the detail. So your poems might be rather short. What happens is that there's a great deal of descriptive material or value in them. So, and then of course I've seen you talk about your camera lenses. So I just put the two together. So do you also imagine or visualize in photography terms your poems?
There is some sort of imagistic process happening, definitely, but yeah, like in some poems, certainly, like for instance in Album, which the poem which is linked to a paranormal event about the faces of Belmes, where mysterious faces started appearing on the kitchen floor in Spain. It's considered to be one of the most famous, infamous, or famous supernatural events in the world. And I thought of kitchen floors appearing on my, faces appearing on my kitchen floor in Austin. And I sort of compared it to a photographer from another, plane of existence, sending rolls of film. And these were my father's memories being projected on the kitchen floor, all his childhood. So yeah, maybe there is a photographic process which I myself, haven't in some points, definitely.
Arjun, we have, I suppose, covered a lot of ground in terms of discussing the cosmos that I somehow don't have an effective conclusion to our session. I mean, except for the fact that I'm very happy to be in conversation with a person who has, I suppose, put in so much of thought within a few lines. In your case, it's, people generally talk about the economy of lines, but in your case, though the lines seem very economical, they are actually deceptive in the sense that they hide a great deal of substance in their shape and form and, in their presences and the gaps that they leave. So I suppose that the other diaries are waiting. But there is also, I think, another dimension to this entire universe that is waiting for you to articulate their craziness, their absurdity, where things probably walk backwards or upside down, where down is up. Because much as I have enjoyed your poetry, I've absolutely adored the short pieces of fiction that you have written, particularly about the Rosagolas. Yeah. For those who are not aware of it, he has written or created this. Yeah.
That book has a lot of those. It's entirely it's about the Rasagullas too.
Yeah. So an entire cosmos of people, and when I began reading it, I think we had posted it on a whim. But when I began reading it, I thought, how am I going to keep track of all of these people? But gradually, they began standing out. Like those, it could almost be like mugshots. That one takes, they began standing out, and you could actually draw threads and be invested in their lives. So for one to be invested in purely psychedelic speculative fiction, it requires a great deal of skill. So I think it is on that note of colors that the eyes are not able to see, but which Arjun is able to see. That's the note on which I would like to end. So thank you very much for being in conversation with us, and all those who have joined us this evening at Anantha.
Thank you so much. This has been delightful, this conversing with you, and yeah, time just passed by. I was just enjoying every minute of it, and loved your questions. Thank you for bringing such an insight and reading my work so closely, and thanks to all of you for being here and for the questions. Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening.
Bye-bye.